This video will be about the Pythagorean Theorem. So the Pythagorean Theorem only applies to right triangles. When you have a right triangle, it's any size triangle that has a right angle. It can be in any direction. As long as it has that right angle symbol, then it's a right triangle. There are two sides called the legs. Those are the sides that are directly touching that right angle. And then a third side called the hypotenuse, and that's across from the right angle. So on this one, across from this right angle is the hypotenuse C. And then A and B can really go in any order. I could have labeled it this way, or I could have put A here and B here. Doesn't matter so much, but the hypotenuse has to be in the correct place. So the formula for the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. If you know two of the sides, maybe they give you a and b, or they could give you a and c, we can use this formula to find the third side. So sometimes they don't even give us a triangle at all. They just tell you the two sides. If we know a is 6 and b is 8, we can plug that into the Pythagorean theorem to find c. So instead of a, we have a 6. Instead of b, we have an 8. And we leave c squared how it is. We actually square these now. 6 squared means to do 6 times 6. The most common mistake here is to do 6 times 2 instead. Remember, the little exponent means to multiply it by itself 2 times. So same thing here, it's 8 times 8, which is 64. 36 plus 64 is 100. And now we have to do the opposite of squared. The opposite of squaring something is to square root. So that would get rid of the little 2, and really the important part is to do the square root of 100, which is 10. So c equals 10. They could also draw a triangle out and not tell you which side is A and which side is B and which side is C. So let's say we have 15 and we have 5 and we don't know this side. We're going to give it a variable. Let's call it x. So when you have a right triangle drawn out, you need to identify the hypotenuse first. That's the one that must go in the C spot. So across from the right angle is our hypotenuse. So C is 15. The other way I look at it is that the right angle symbol touches the right side, and the right angle symbol touches the top side. This actual symbol here is touching those two sides. The hypotenuse is the one that it's not touching. So we go to our Pythagorean theorem formula. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. We plug in x for a, 5 for b, and 15 for c. And again, a and b don't matter so much as long as you've identified c correctly. I could have written this as 5 squared plus x squared equals 15 squared, and I'd still get the correct answer. So now we square. 5 squared is 5 times 5, or 25. 15 squared is 15 times 15, or 225. Now we do have to do some opposites. When we work with our equation, what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. And we always do the opposite operation. If we're adding 25 here, the opposite would be to subtract 25. So the x squared just comes down. 225 minus 25 is 200. And then opposite of squaring something is to square root it. And when we do that opposite, it gets rid of the little 2. Now if we plug this into a calculator, it's going to give a very weird decimal. So if we do 200 square rooted, gives 14.14 and a super long decimal. They could approximate if it ever says to find the total approximation or uses the word approximate or estimate in any way. They could say, well, maybe the answer is just 14.1. Or if they put it in exact format, when you're working with a square root and you want it in exact format, you can figure out how to do that by breaking it down using a factor tree. 200 is 2 times 100. So we've broken down 200, it's not useful anymore. 100 can break down to be 10 times 10. 100 was broken down, it's not useful anymore. 2 cannot break down. The only thing that would work would be 2 times 1. And if you ever get a 1, that's not helpful. So we leave 2. It's called a prime number, so we leave it how it is. 10 can break down to be 2 times 5, and so can the other 10. And now we're down to all prime numbers. So this becomes 2, and I'm going to group the like numbers together. We have 2 times 2 times 2. There were 3 of the 2's, and 5 times 5. So because we are doing square root, we're looking for groups of 2. There were 2 2's that are the same and 2 5's, and then an extra 2. It didn't have a group of 2. So the groups of 2, you're going to actually multiply that all back together. 2 times 2 is 4, 5 times 5 is 25, and 4 times 25 is 100. So that will get its own square root symbol. All the groups of 2 gets its own square root symbol. The extra 2 also gets its own square root symbol. So the reason we go through that whole process and the reason we pick these groups of 2 is because when you multiply only groups of 2 back together, you get a perfect square. We can take the square root of 100, that is 10. So you're left with 10 times square root 2, or 10 square root 2. That is the exact answer. If we plug it into a calculator, so remember the square root of 200 is this 14.14. If we do square root of 2 times 10, we get the same answer, 14.14. It's just written in its simplified format. We can also do a Pythagorean Theorem word problem. So Sherry is flying a kite. She let out 100 feet of string. So we have a person flying a kite and connecting from the person to the kite is 100 feet of string. If Mike is directly underneath the kite, so another person directly under the kite, and is also 40 feet away from Sherry, so they're 40 feet apart, approximately how high up is the kite in the air to the nearest foot? So when we connect these two things together, we form that right triangle, and we're looking for the height of the kite. The hypotenuse is across from the right angle, so 100 feet is C, and we can go plug it into our Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. C is the 100 feet, h and 40 feet are the a and b, and now we can solve for the height. 40 squared is 40 times 40, which is 1600, or 1600. 100 times 100 is 10,000. We subtract 1600, they're on opposite sides, so we have to minus them. 10,000 minus 1600 is 8,400, and then we square root. It did say to approximate to the nearest foot. The square root of 8,400 is 91.65, and if we're approximating to the nearest foot, we're looking at this 1 and deciding, is it going to stay 91 or is it going to round up to 92? After the decimal is this 6. 6 is between 5 and 10, so when the number is from 5 I should say 5 to 9 rather. When the number is from 5 to 9, then this rounds up. So h is approximately 92 feet. So that concludes our discussion on the Pythagorean theorem.